The moment you stop caring is the moment the avoidant changes the rules of the game, not because they suddenly value you, but because they feel something far more dangerous than loss. They feel powerless, and avoidants do not fear abandonment the way others do. They fear exposure. They fear emotional accountability. And when you stop caring, you unknowingly trigger the final cruel trap they were always saving for the moment they could no longer control you. Because your silence is not peaceful to them. It is threatening. It tells them they no longer occupy space in your emotional world, and that realization shakes the foundation of how they survive relationships, because avoidants don't bond through connection. They bond through distance and control. And when you stop chasing, explaining, waiting, hoping, reacting, something inside them panics quietly, not loudly, not with tears but with strategy, because an avoidant never reacts emotionally first. They react tactically. And this is where the trap begins. They reappear, not with commitment, not with clarity, but with familiarity, a message that feels casual, a memory reference, a soft check-in, something designed to feel harmless, because the goal is not to get you back. The goal is to see if they still can. And if you respond with even a hint of warmth, the trap tightens, because now they know you still care enough to be accessible, but not enough to demand anything. And that is the most dangerous position you can be in with an avoidant, because now they will give you just enough presence to keep you emotionally engaged and just enough distance to avoid responsibility. And you will feel confused because you thought stopping caring would end the cycle. But instead it feels like the cycle has restarted in a quieter, colder way, and this is intentional, because the avoidant's cruelest move is not disappearance. It is partial availability. It is showing up without staying, speaking without meaning, touching without holding, promising without delivering, and this phase feels worse than being abandoned because it keeps your nervous system activated while giving you nothing solid to stand on. And you start questioning yourself, wondering why you feel unsettled even though nothing bad is technically happening. But what is happening is psychological erosion, because the avoidant is testing whether you will accept less than before simply because you no longer expect more, and every time you do, they reinforce the belief that they can access you without changing. And the cruel part is that they will frame this as growth, as maturity, as taking things slow, as being realistic, while quietly benefiting from your emotional restraint. And you may even feel proud of yourself for not reacting, for being calm, for being detached, not realizing that your detachment is being used as permission. And this is where many people lose themselves, because they mistake emotional numbness for healing and tolerance for strength. But avoidance can sense when you are emotionally tired rather than emotionally free. And they exploit that space, because a tired heart is easier to manage than a demanding one. And the trap deepens when they begin to mirror your new energy, acting calm, respectful, consistent in small doses, enough to make you question whether the past was exaggerated, enough to make you doubt your own memory. And this is gaslighting without words, because nothing overt is happening, but everything feels off, and you can't explain it. And the reason this trap works is because it activates your hope without triggering their fear, and that balance is where avoidants thrive. But what they don't realize is that when you truly stop caring, not performatively, not defensively, but genuinely, this trap fails, because the real shift is not silence. It is indifference, and indifference does not wait, does not analyze, does not wonder. It observes and moves on. And in this first stage, you are still observing, still emotionally present, still affected. And that is why this phase feels confusing and heavy. Because you are halfway out, but still reachable, and the avoidant knows it. And they will keep you there as long as you allow access without expectation. Because for them, the worst outcome is not losing you. It is losing the option of you. And the final cruel trap is designed to keep you as an option while convincing you that you are free, and until you recognize that, the cycle continues quietly, invisibly, draining you without dramatic breakups or clear endings. Just slow emotional fading. And this is only the beginning. What most people don't realize is that the avoidant does not set this trap consciously in a villainous way. It is a survival reflex built from years of emotional shutdown. And when you stop caring, they interpret it not as independence but as a threat to their internal balance, because your emotional withdrawal removes the role they relied on you to play, the one who waited, explained, softened, forgave. And when that role disappears, they feel destabilized. But instead of confronting that discomfort, they externalize it onto you by pulling you back into a familiar dynamic that feels safe to them. And this is where the confusion intensifies, because suddenly they appear more attentive than before, more curious, more emotionally present on the surface. But underneath, nothing has changed, and this false improvement keeps you emotionally invested just long enough to delay full detachment, and you start telling yourself that maybe this time is different. Maybe space really helped, maybe stopping caring fixed everything. But what actually happened is that your emotional distance reduced the pressure on them, allowing them to re-enter without feeling engulfed. And this is why the trap feels subtle, because it masquerades as progress. And the avoidant benefits from this stage the most, because they get connection without obligation, reassurance without vulnerability, intimacy without accountability. And meanwhile you are slowly training yourself to accept just to maintain peace, and this self-abandonment happens quietly, because there is no conflict to react to, no argument to justify your pain, just a lingering emptiness that grows each time you notice that you are the only one emotionally adjusting. And the avoidant senses this imbalance but does not correct it, because correcting it would require them to step into emotional responsibility, which is exactly what they fear. And so they keep things undefined, ambiguous, flexible, always just enough but never complete. And this ambiguity becomes the cage, because you cannot leave something that has no clear shape, and you cannot confront something that never fully reveals itself. And this is why people stay stuck in this phase longer than any other, because it feels calm compared to chaos, even though it is slowly eroding your self-worth. And the cruelest part is that the avoidant may genuinely believe they are doing better, because from their perspective, there is less conflict, less intensity, less demand, and they mistake your emotional withdrawal for compatibility, not realizing that compatibility built on suppression is not connection. It is quiet loss. And as time passes, you may notice that you are less expressive, less excited, less emotionally available in general, not just with them but with life, because you are subconsciously bracing yourself. And this numbness can feel like maturity, like strength, like growth. But it is actually a protective free response, and the avoidant benefits from this because a frozen partner does not require emotional attunement. And this is where the trap reveals its true nature, because the goal was never reconciliation or healing. The goal was regulation. They used your emotional shutdown to stabilize themselves while destabilizing you. And once they feel secure again, once they feel that you are emotionally accessible but no longer challenging, their interest subtly fades, not dramatically, just gradually. Responses slow, effort drops, presence thins, and you are left wondering why you feel abandoned again, even though nothing officially ended. And this delayed abandonment hurts deeper because it comes after hope. And by the time you recognize what happened, you are already emotionally depleted, questioning whether you ever truly stopped caring, or if you just learned how to care quietly. And the truth is that the moment you genuinely stop caring, this entire structure collapses, because avoidance cannot maintain connection without control. And indifference removes control completely. And when they realize you are no longer emotionally tracking them, no longer affected by their presence or absence, no longer available for regulation, they experience a different kind of loss, one they cannot repair with half effort, and that realization either forces growth or final retreat. But until that point, this trap exists to delay your freedom, not to restore love, and understanding this is what begins the real ending, not the quiet fading they designed for you. By the time you reach this stage, something inside you has already shifted, even if you cannot name it yet, because the trap has begun to fail, not because the avoidant changed, but because you are no longer emotionally available in the way they need. And this is where their behavior becomes unpredictable, because avoidants are comfortable when the dynamic is distant but stable, and deeply uncomfortable when the distance no longer gives them leverage. And they sense this loss of leverage before you do, in small moments where their usual tactics no longer land, where your response is neutral instead of warm, where your silence is not loaded with expectation, where your presence does not feel anchored to them. And this subtle indifference unsettles them more than anger ever did, because anger still proves emotional investment, but indifference signals autonomy, and autonomy is the one thing an avoidant cannot regulate through distance. And as they feel this shift, they begin to escalate the trap, not by pulling away, but by pulling closer in inconsistent ways, showing flashes of depth, vulnerability, even self-awareness, saying the things you always wanted to hear, but only briefly, only when they sense you slipping beyond reach. And this intermittent intensity is designed to hook you emotionally, because the human brain attaches strongest to inconsistency paired with relief, and you may feel your heart respond even though your mind knows better, and this internal conflict is exhausting, because now you are not chasing them, you are managing yourself, trying not to fall back into hope, trying to stay grounded, and this self-monitoring drains you, while the avoidant remains largely unchanged. And this is when the final cruelty becomes clear, because the avoidant is not trying to rebuild the relationship, they are trying to reestablish the emotional tether, the invisible string that allows them access without responsibility. And once that tether is secured, their effort fades again, and you realize that every moment of closeness was conditional not on mutual growth, but on your availability. And this realization is painful because it reframes the entire connection, forcing you to see that what felt like love was often regulation. What felt like longing was often control, and what felt like chemistry was often nervous system activation. And as this clarity settles in, something important happens. You stop personalizing their behavior, you stop seeing their inconsistency as a reflection of your worth, and instead you recognize the pattern as self-contained, repetitive, and emotionally closed. And this recognition is the real exit point, because once you see the structure, it loses its power. And this is when the avoidant senses the end, not because you announce it, but because your energy is no longer reactive, no longer waiting, no longer shaped around them. And this is the moment they often reveal their most confusing behavior, sudden declarations, future talk, symbolic gestures, all designed to create emotional impact, not follow through. And if you fall for this, the cycle restarts. But if you don't, if you remain grounded in your clarity, something irreversible occurs. The avoidant loses access to you as an emotional resource, and this loss hits them later, not immediately, because avoidants process loss slowly, after the distance becomes permanent, after the option is gone. And while they may move on externally, internally the unresolved connection lingers, not because of love, but because they never learned how to stay emotionally present long enough to complete a bond. And you, meanwhile, begin to feel something unfamiliar. Peace without anticipation, calm without vigilance, connection to yourself without negotiation. And this is how you know the trap is over. Not because the avoidant disappeared, but because their presence no longer matters, and this is the ending they never planned for. Because it is the one outcome they cannot control.